What up? What up? All right. Well, I was going to say tonight, but you're going to watch this tomorrow. I do want to talk about the net neutrality scenario that you guys did an FRQ last week on. And I must tell you, um, for a variety of reasons, I'm sure, but the scores were disappointing. And I understand that in this e learning environment, sometimes it's very difficult to either be focused. There might be stressors going on in the household, distractions, or since we know that our grade cannot be lowered, that we don't put forth 100% effort. And I want to really caution you because this style of question is going to be 40% of your grade on the test on May 11th. And I would say probably 60%, maybe not that high, but over 50% of my students in my two periods got a 0 or 1 out of 3 on this. And if that is a score that we're going to be attaining on May 11th, that is not a passing score. So moving forward, and I don't want you to be enamored with your scores on this particular question. You know how much preparation, effort you put into this response. But when I get responses with a sentence for each prompt, that is completely unacceptable. You are not going to do well on the test if that's what you put down in regards to the amount of writing that you put into this. You have 15 minutes, and I'll talk about each of the three prompts and how much time you should probably invest in each of them. But it's worth 3 points, but it's worth 40% of your grade. And it just did not appear that people took it seriously. And some did very well. A few of you did very well, got 3 out of 3. And it was a very complicated question. This is a tough, tough question. And I do want to go through it so that in the event that you see something like a independent regulatory commission on the prompt on May 11th, that you're prepared. I will say this on a side note that, these question and answer sessions that I've been holding have not been well attended. And I think the students that attended the one on the bureaucracy last week inevitably did better on this question. So I would ask or encourage you to attend if you can. And so let's get into it. In May 2017, the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, announced a proposal to repeal net neutrality rules that govern how internet service providers treat internet traffic. Under net neutrality rules, and the key here is rules, companies that sell internet services to customers must provide access to all websites at the same speed. Without net neutrality, internet service companies can charge consumers or websites a premium for high-speed access to certain sites. As required by statute means law, the FCC opened up the proposed rule for public comment. That's a key there. So when these independent regulatory agencies change rules, whatever it is, whether it's the Fed, IRS, in this case FCC, they have to open it up to public comment. That's essential for this question, because later on they're going to ask you, how can interest groups affect this rulemaking process? The rule received an astonishing 21 million comments. However, a study of the comments by Pew Research showed that only 6% of the comments were unique, suggesting that the comments were part of an organized campaign or organized campaigns and possibly generated by computer bots. For example, on 9 different occasions, more than 75,000 comments were submitted within the same second. Many of the commenter names and email addresses also appeared to be fake. So when you read the prompt, read it carefully. They're going to provide potentially clues to answers in the prompt. The first part for answering this particular question, part A, says, referencing the scenario, describe the function being carried out by the FCC. What you have to understand in regards to these FRQs is when the graders are grading your FRQ, they have a rubric that they cannot stray from, meaning they can't, look at your your writing and say, well, yeah, this looks like it could be potentially a right answer. There's only a couple right answers, and in part A, there's one. So let's look at it. So for task A or part A, describe the function being carried out. It is the rule-making function. That's the key here. Rule-making function. If you did not say anything about rules, you did not get the point. AP is very specific in what they want. And specifically this, power or function of the FCC is the ability to make rules. And so a lot of you talked for part A about iron triangles, which is great. And I understand where you're going with that, but understand, and I talked about this last week, there's a difference between bureaucratic agencies like the Department of Education, Department of Defense, etc., as opposed to independent regulatory commissions. The word independent is a key. They're independent of political pressure, meaning they cannot be pressured by congressional committees. We'll get into that in part C, but there are ways to have oversight over these independent regulatory commissions, but understand that they act independently. The iron triangle is done before any passing of legislation or policy. These independent regulatory agencies are taking policy that's already being passed and making rules about it. And so the iron triangle is not applicable in this particular case. If the prompt was talking about a new policy being proposed for, an ag bill or Department of Agriculture, then you could talk about that. But that's not the function. The FCC does not participate in an iron triangle per se. They can be influenced. So you could get 1 point there. Many of you did not get that point. So you have to be very careful. And when I talk to you about going over the notes or the reading, this is all in there in regards to these independent regulatory commissions. And again, this is a very difficult question. Part B, explain how interest groups can affect the process described in Part A. Some of you talked about litigation. No, that doesn't deal with the rulemaking. After the rule is passed, then you could litigate, but that would not be applicable here. Again, a lot of people talked about the iron triangle here. They talked about lobbying Congress. You could not get that point unless you were specifically talking about lobbying in the context of trying to convince Congress to pass a law that would clearly define the rule, which they can do. We'll get into that later. And so the answers that AP accepted were: interest groups can organize people to comment on the proposed rule. Essentially, they're giving you the answer up here in the prompt, but that is something they can do. They can try to grassroots get their members to go put comments on. So I don't necessarily love this question, but they kind of give you the answer here in the prompt. So sometimes that would occur. The second one is using of media. And that's one of the tactics we talked about in interest groups that would be applicable here. So create an advertisement campaign to try to influence public opinion to either oppose or support the proposed change in the net neutrality rule. And so this was again worth 1 point. For the first task, I would say you only need 1 or 2 sentences. For this one, you need a little bit more because it says explain. And if you can give an example, like a hypothetical example of a advertisement campaign, that would be great. If you say explain, you need to be a little more explicit in your response. We're talking 4 to 5 sentences. So please, a lot of you put 1 sentence down for part B. That is completely unacceptable, and you're far more likely not to get the point than get the point. Part C says, in December of 2017, the FCC created the rule ending net neutrality. So now the rule has been enacted. Explain how Congress could respond to the decision made by the FCC if it opposes a new rule. Here, a lot of you put power of the purse, which is great. I emphasize that it's a tremendous power that Congress has over executive departments. However, even if you defunded the FCC, the rule still is on the books. That doesn't end the rule. And so power of the purse would not be applicable here. AP has three potential answers. You don't need all three. And again, it's explained, so you need more than just one sentence. You need an explanation. How or why what Congress does could affect the rule. Congress can call on members of the FCC to testify before a committee to discuss the reasons for the proposed rule. Oversight. I talked about it a lot when we were talking about Congress, at least in the screencast, but this ability for Congress to oversee these independent regulatory agencies. They can call them in front of committee and put pressure on them on why they made the rule. And so that was one potential answer. Congress can pass a law that would override the rule made by the FCC. Again, Congress gives these independent regulatory agencies with policy experts a lot of latitude to kind of fill in the blanks in regards to law. So in this particular case, when you talk about the Federal Communications Commission, they're given a lot of power to kind of define what is okay in regards to media, internet, television, radio, etc. However, Congress can override that rule with a formal law. So the lawmaking process here would be in play, not necessarily appropriations or giving of money. Sometimes the answer is easier than you think. But in this particular case, you can talk about a law, but please go a little bit further in regards to how it addresses net neutrality, etc. This last one is very, very specific. I don't know how you would know it unless you were using, tools at your disposal. I don't know if it's in the book. It could be in the book. I don't think it is. But if you Googled or did something like that. But the Congressional Review Act, I think one person explicitly alluded to that. And so that is one way in which you can, I guess, specifically mention a law that is actual that they could use. But you don't need to be identifying a specific law by name. You can just talk about passing a law in this particular case. So this question was worth 3 points, but it's worth 40% of your grade. And again, if you're getting 1 out of 3, 40% of your grade is going to be a 33%. And that's not going to put you in a good position going into the argumentative essay, which I think you guys are all going to do well as long as you know your foundational documents. We're going to go over that as we proceed over the next 2.5 weeks. So please, I would implore you, I'm going to give you a few more practice FRQs. It does no good to just go through the motions and get it done in 6 minutes. Believe it or not, AP Classroom, I can see how many minutes you spent of the allotted minutes to answer the question. It's not going to make you better or put you in a better position for the test on May 11th. I'm not going to be graded or evaluated on how well you do, but I want you to do the best that you can possibly do on that test. So please, I'm not giving you a ton of work while we're in e-learning. I'm trying to keep it reasonable. But if I give you these FRQs, then you got to take it seriously, because this is exactly, I don't know if the, platform is going to be exactly the same, but you're going to be doing it online. You're going to be doing it timed, and you have to write more than 3 sentences. It's just that simple. 95% of you are going to take the test on May 11th, and I want you to do the best that you can do. So I hope all is well. Peace.